Hello and welcome to the Portal Stormer channel. My name is Kelly Proudfoot and I am sharing stories about all kinds of different things to do with psychology and mental health and trauma processing and CPTSD. But this particular video I wanted to talk about my specific issues with my mother. She passed away in February 2023, but a lot of the issues I had with her was alcoholism as well as narcissism, and there's lots of in-betweens and ups and downs, but I'm not going to tell everything chronologically, just to touch base and to share that's one of the main things in my background that I'm dealing with. And I went to the Pennual Ridge Retreat Centre to just do a 2-day boot camp. I call it a spiritual vomitorium because I was sick of all the little, what I would call the weak modalities that were like more aggrandizing the depression or making you feel like, oh yes, this is my identity, and I never wanted to identify with it. But I will say it's interesting that throughout my life there were many periods where there was almost a gothic appeal to be able to say, oh, I'm dealing with depression, and you can almost use it like a blanket to pull over you. But when I went to the retreat I completely cut that out, and now I'm dealing with the aftermath. It's been 3 weeks and I'm still reeling. But it's such a different experience. I'm cobbling together a new life. But anyway, the stuff that I dealt with Mum, I mean, we all have issues with parents, good, bad or ugly, but with her it was the double whammy of not only the drinking, which was pretty much an everyday thing. I have a cat annoying me once again. This is Kerouac, go away. But we were living from pillar to post, you know, a couple of years at my Nana and Pa's place, a year or two with my father and his girlfriend, and then when I was 9, and therefore my brothers were 7 and 5, Mum won custody, and we went to live with her, and which was the first time for years. And little did we know that she had this massive drinking problem. Years later, other family members would talk about it, and that was something that kind of made me a little bit angry too, because some family members love to gossip about my mum to me. So even though I had my own issues with her, when other people would do it, it was almost like, I already know, go and tell someone else, you know. But anyway, one of the things about Mum is that she was, when she was sober, a great person, as most people who have that duality are, but she had a really tough life. When she was young, she was one of 13 kids, and her mother passed away giving birth to the last 2 kids, which were twins. One of them died, I think. But Mum was one of the 3 youngest, and what happened was, her mum was actually a famous, well, in those days, back in the 20s, I think, a famous dancer in Australia. Being Aboriginal, she would be often playing different roles as well as the male. But anyway, that's a long-winded story. She ended up being an opium addict, and so obviously addiction runs in the family. My brother passed away in '97 from a heroin overdose. And so my grandfather on my mum's side, who was the husband, of course, of my grandmother, who was the opium addict, he was Chinese, and he was in the war. He was a cook in the Navy, but he apparently got shrapnel in his head in the Second World War, and my auntie said that was the excuse, that he sort of went downhill towards the end, but no, it was apparently alcohol. He was an alcoholic. So the 3 youngest kids were shipped away, well, were going to be shipped away to a children's home because the older kids were old enough to go and live with each other or live by themselves. But at the last minute, apparently, this is what my mother tells me, and of course I believe her, but you don't know if that was the narcissist talking or, you know, the wounded child. I'm not sure, but I'm not here to dissect her just yet. But the two youngest kids, the oldest sister decided that she would take the two youngest kids. And so Mum was left in the home, and it was called the Kildonnan home. It was in Australia, in Melbourne. And she told me a lot of stories about what happened there. When she was sober, it was more believable, of course, but when she was drunk, it was all these crazy stories. But who knows? Truth and fiction can mix easily. She would say things like when the families would come to adopt the children, that she and the other darker kids would be kept away because it was assumed the white families wouldn't want to take a darker kid. I can see that happening, especially back then in the 40s and 50s. But anyway, to cut a long story short, she ended up staying there for a long time and was actually billeted out at 16 years of age, stayed with a family who helped her go to secretarial school, and then she met Dad and so on and so on, and I was born in 66. But like I said, we were living with them for a couple of years, and then my Nana and Pa and Dad, and then my dad and his girlfriend, and then Mum won custody when I was 9. And I remember that first night we were there. We'd moved in, we were excited to be back with Mum. It was like fantastic. We were just so thrilled. And then she sat us all down and said, I want you kids to know. Mind you, she'd drunk between the time we got back to unpack and then when she sat us down, and she said, just so you know, the only reason that I went to court is because I like to win, and I won. And she might have been wounded by the divorce with Dad, but she was marrying someone else who was a lovely guy. But I remember when she told me that, I was thinking, I mean, it was told to all of us, all 3 kids, and I was thinking, why would she say that? Because I was always the kid asking why. And also, I was always very highly sensitive, and my volumes turned way up, so I learned through her if she was getting angry, because she could be a demon depending on what she drank. But when I was dealing with her, I had to block myself and protect myself, but at the same time placate her and try to match her anger so that she would realise, oh, okay, that she'd get calmer, but I was still bristling, and it was just to make her get away and stop attacking me or having a tantrum in front of me. And I learned that behaviour, and it's only a recent realisation that my having to build up to match her energy just to, I'm on your side, okay, just be quiet, you know, has made me so reactionary. And in my whole adult life, you know, when other people tell their sad stories, I feel it like it happened to me. And I think it's because I was forced at a young age to understand, almost be a psychoanalyst from Mum. There were times where, for example, if she drank beer or champagne or anything sort of like a sparkling cider or whatever, she'd be mostly happy or a childish drunk. She was mostly manageable, but she would end up doing stupid stuff, and you'd have to stop her from falling headfirst in the fireplace or what have you. But when she drank spirits, scotch, or even fortified wines like port or muscat, she would be totally different. She would deliberately put on this turbo beast voice, like she wanted to be as aggressive as possible. Kids come here and blah blah blah. But hell of a lot louder than that, of course. And it was always things like, I've got a bone to pick with you. So whenever you come home from school, if she happened to be home that day, or later on from work when I was in my later teens, you wondered what you were going to meet when you walked in the door. Now, one thing I will say, actually 2 things that I'm very grateful that never happened to me, was I was never SA'd, but there were many attempts of molestation, and I am very grateful that I had not only my mum but the other strong women and men in our life that would have, you know, turned into a beast and ripped that person apart if they'd ever hurt us. So we were protected in that way, and plus also we were always told, you never, if someone says don't tell, you do the opposite, you tell. So we were a pretty good setup in terms of protecting ourselves if the parents weren't around. But I'm just keeping my eye out for the cats because I've tried to clear the room and keep it quiet, but you know, they're going to come sniffing around. I forget where I was, but anyway, when she would drink like that, when she was that aggressive, it could be when you were coming home, and she would just be like waiting, like you could tell she should have been, get out, come on. She should have been in the movies because she was very dramatic. And she'd be sitting, and you could tell she probably spent a long time posturing herself in the armchair by the fireplace as I came in the door. I got a bone to pick with you. You know, so what was that routine, lying in wait? And she just loved that routine. But sounds like I'm being ungrateful, but there was a lot. I haven't even scratched the surface. Just to give you an example, and I'm not dragging her over the coals to be mean, because after having gone through that retreat, I've dealt with all that, but it's funny how it's still settling, the dust is still settling. But just as an example, when I was 12, we had a family reunion. There was always an excuse for a party every weekend, just about. And everyone was out the back, and I was 12, and I, of course, had started having my period a year before. Now, at that time, I was on my period, and I, you know, just like anyone, you use what you need to use, and you can go swimming. So I did. And then in front of everybody, she just yelled out, "Kelly," you know, in a drunken voice. And I just turn around, and she's going, "You got your period. What are you doing in the pool, you dirty bitch? Get out of there." This is in front of everybody, men and women, people I didn't even know, some of them, my brothers. And luckily my brothers sort of stand up, "Oh, that's mean, that's cruel," you know. And some parents, I mean, some of the other adults went off at her too and said, "That's terrible, how could you do that?" And of course I was already mortified, so I marched myself inside, and the other aunties and friends of the family ran in and told me, "Oh, look, you know, she's teaching you how not to be. This is a good lesson for you." And I'm just like, because, you know, when you're a kid going through stuff like that, especially when you're a highly sensitive kid and everything is like 10 times more intense than it might be for someone else, you just don't feel understood or protected. And all the excuses they would make for her, and this is what we do, a lot of people do this in life, you make excuses for the bad person because it's easier to deal with than trying to rectify the situation or do something about the situation. And other people did try, but it was more like you would expect, like calling Child Protective Services. As a matter of fact, when that happened, I was probably around 13, and when the guy came to the door, it was amazing how I just flipped and I became protective of Mum, and said, "No, she's just gone shopping," when she'd gone walkabout. When I say walkabout, I mean we do have Aboriginal and Chinese, and we just use that as a term. When she would go missing, we would just say she's gone walkabout. And she could be with anyone, and her boyfriend would be running around, "I'm trying to find your mum." Us kids were left in the house with virtually no food. There was one particular time when there was just a couple of dry lasagna sheets and a handful of crystallised fruit that you normally put in a fruit cake. And of course that's not enough for 3 kids, so I was about 13 at the time, and my brothers were 11 and 9. So anyway, I had to go over to a neighbour, and mind you, I'm going to a neighbour who was a crazy lady, but at least she was compassionate when it came to feeding kids. There was so much about her, she's had a crazy story, but anyway. Just that walk from our house to hers, knowing that because we were left without any food, that I was in the position to beg. So I was upset and scared and wondering whether she'd say no or call the police. I didn't know. But also, number 2, that my mum had put me in that position without any food, just took off, you know. So anyway, there were many other times when it was like that. Either the electricity was going to get cut off because she hadn't paid the bills because she's drinking it. And we would have to go and stay at relatives where it wasn't so safe for kids because they had certain types hanging around the house. And there was a time when one of the uncles tried to do something to me, and I just held firm and said, I'm going to go and tell Auntie Lola. You know, it was just incidences like that in my childhood. But because of her, and of course she wasn't dealing with her own psyche, she had shit going on, but my attitude is, if you know you got shit going on, you deal with it, and you don't inflict it on your kids, no matter what excuse. I continued making excuses for her, and other people would do it too, so I would feel guilty about feeling bad about some of the things that were happening. There was a lot of stuff that a kid shouldn't see, whether it was mum being so drunk she couldn't, friends turned up to take her to an opera or some sort of outing, and I told them she can't go. I was probably 14, 15. She can't go, look at her, she's drunk. And they made me help them put her in the shower, and she was so drunk that all of a sudden her eyes rolled back and her tongue just came out, and it was almost down to here. That imagery of your own mother with that shit going on was just too much. And of course I directed my rage towards the couple, and I said, she's not going. And anyway, there were other situations where I had to bail her out, where she'd call me, this is when I was older, an adult, and she'd say, come and get me. I was, sorry, my cats are being naughty. So I would have to go and bail her out. I'd have to go and go to the hotel where this guy, who she'd just met at the bar the night before, had dumped her, took off with her clothes and her purse, so she had nothing. So I had to turn up with clothes and help her get home. So it was often stuff like that. But when I was a kid, it was different, because you don't know what's going on. You just got this scary person who might at any moment, any time of the day or night, burst into your bedroom, screaming at you that you didn't do something right, or screaming to call the police because she was having a domestic with her boyfriend, who was a lovely guy, but he drank too, and he was a sweetheart. But, you know, codependency and all that stuff. Whenever we pointed out to Mum that we didn't like her drinking, she would always say, I have the prerogative to drink. And then we would say, well, we have the prerogative not to be around you when you're drunk. Now that's when we were older, like later teens and onwards. When you're a kid, you can't say that. And my mum's, she was very reactive. Every time you just raised an eyebrow at her, don't you look at me like that. Or if you did answer back, for example, she would always have to call family meetings when she was drunk, and so we'd all come dragging ourselves out of our bedrooms, and of course it was this trumped up bullshit that she was talking about, or stuff that was completely nuts, like, that was Auntie Jeannie 2 years ago, what are you talking about? But then she would really elevate, and she would boom, and she would deliberately boom. Now mind you, she was like 4'11", but she, as she used to always like to say, dynamite comes in small packages, and I would say under my breath, yeah, so does poison. But she was always wearing high heels. She always had to strut around. She was, you know, hated the fact that she was short. But when so it was almost like she was exercising power that she felt she didn't either have when she was a kid growing up or out in the world, and especially being a darker woman at the time, where you would be either vilified or idolised. Just to give you an example, we'd go to parties and all of a sudden she'd put on this routine with new people she hadn't met. I'm a Tahitian princess, or a Polynesian princess, or Mother Earth, or whatever. And of course I'm there listening to the lie. Everybody else is just falling all over her and not being funny. But even the white people used to make me sick, because it's like, okay, she's giving you this story and you're falling for it, but you're deliberately fawning over her in a performative way to try to illustrate to everybody else, see, I'm cool with black people, or whatever. I picked up on all those vibes when I was a kid. I would always analyse and think about, and constantly watching her thinking, don't you understand your reputation and what people think of you when you're out in public acting like you do? Because she would do some crazy things. But the thing that really, I think, got to me, and it's something that I've unearthed since I was at the retreat, is that it seemed that she really enjoyed inflicting pain, even though when she was sober she cared. Oh, here, I brought you some stamps. She would come up with food parcels and everything. But she loved being the Queen of Hearts, coming in and saving the day. So it was interesting. She liked to make you cry, and then she would soothe you. So she was not only the perpetrator, but the saviour, you know. And she would do that a lot with people. And it used to annoy me when people say, oh, your mum's just the Queen of Hearts. And I'd be thinking, really? You don't know anything. But anyway, how I dealt with it, I think over the years what happened was, even though like when I was a kid trying to appease her when she was in a bad mood, you give her a gift and she looks at it and goes, oh, okay. Or there was a good example of being used and underappreciated was when debt collectors came to the door. And she told me, I think I was around 12, 13, to go to the door and deal with it. And I didn't know what was going on. And then, of course, the guy was furious because she wouldn't come to the door, and he's yelling at me like I'm a kid. Well, she needs to know if she doesn't fix this, there's going to be big trouble, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so I just kept saying, I don't know what you're talking about. She's not home, she's shopping. Meanwhile, she's around the corner at her bedroom door, hissing at me, shut the door, shut the door. And then when I tried to shut the door, he started yelling out, you know, what? Let me see, what have we got here? Curtains, alcohol, furniture? You know, he was blurting out all the things that she'd spent the money on. But he thrust the papers at me. I took them and closed the door. And when I went to give them to her, she snatched them out of my hand. And then, I forget what she said, but it was something like, why did it take so long or whatever? And I just thought to myself, okay, this has nothing to do with me. I'm a kid. She's obviously fucked up, but somehow it's all my fault. And incidents like that happened all throughout my childhood and teenagehood, and I think solidified in me this vein that became a gnarled fist, because that anger from being powerless and not knowing if at 2 in the morning we might be whisked away in a cab because she just had a big fight with her boyfriend again, or we run out of food again, or bills are going to be cut off, or strange men and people in the house, and that was sometimes difficult to navigate. But I did it because luckily I had been at least prepared when I was younger to know that's not wrong and do whatever you can to get out of it. But it's funny how they will build you up to, because they're so, and you see this a lot today, especially with some real mongrels that are out there who think it's okay to be evil and treat their, and raise their kids to be evil, to hate certain people for whatever reason. But at the same time, they're all about taking care of themselves at the same time. And Mum was like that too. She would project outwards about other people. Look at her. Oh my God, I can't believe it. Just gossip and bitchy, and everybody else was shit, but she was awesome. To then to be at the same token someone who would build you up and try and say, don't you take this, but then again it was all about power, so I understand that. But it's all wrapped up in my psyche, so this has been a long-winded way just to share the stories behind why I'm doing this channel, why I want to share my story, because I would hope that there would be other people out there who might want to share their stories, regardless as to whether it was a mother or a father, regardless as to whether it was alcohol or narcissism even, because trauma can come in all kinds of different sizes and packages. And if we can comment, or if you'd like to subscribe, that'd be awesome. And tell me your stories, and I'd love to talk about them too. And that's something, this is going to grow. This is very much a hodgepodge channel, but at the same time, to me it's all about mental health, and that's through storytelling, however you tell the story and whoever's telling the story and whatever the story is. So I will share a lot more from time to time about certain things that happened in my childhood and how I'm tracking that. Everything's all in different layers, and I'm trying to reach singularity, and that, when I say that, I just mean get back to some kind of normal. So I'm not so reactionary, so I'm not so angry when people come at me with their arms outstretched. Help me fix my life. You fix it yourself. I went through my life withdrawing and hiding just to stop people coming at me, and I know now why I did that, and the unravelling of that is difficult. I've hardly eaten a lot since the retreat, which was 3 weeks ago. Even during the retreat I couldn't eat or sleep Luckily the sleep's been great because my husband got a great mattress, and that's been good. But slowly but surely building up with the health, and therefore hopefully the mental health will at least get to that frequency where it's manageable. Because at the moment it's the temper flare-ups. I think they're triggered by the unfairness of people coming at me expecting me to do everything. I'm not saying everyone does that, but there's certain times, whether it's people, clients or otherwise. Also overblown expectations. You know, we all have to deal with that in every day. But when you have all those little spinning plates going, and it turns out, you know what, those plates are starting to crash because I'm not able to keep each stick going, you realise that the centre's not holding, and you've got to start taking stock, which is why I went and did the retreat, did 14 pages of turbo writing of angry. I'm amazed that flames weren't coming off the page. But once I did that, I realised, okay, there's a lot more purging to do, but at least the majority of, well, at least that hard shell that was around me was cracked. And I'm still putting it all back together. And as I go through this journey, I would love it if you could join me, and I'll share my stories, you'll share your stories. We might do some dream interpretation. We might talk about my sleep paralysis, the episodes I had when I was a kid, and all the amazing stories about that, the things I saw, and the synchronicity in life which made you think, was this real or not, you know? But yeah, I'm going to share more at a later stage, and I would really love it if you could subscribe. Help me grow the channel, see where this goes. So anyway, until we talk next time, take care, and blessed be, and be nice to each other.